Ever wonder how elite athletes train? Today, I'll show you why Daniel's running formula is a go-to resource for top runners, and how it can transform your training no matter what your age or level. Hi, I'm Stephen Lawrence, and over the last few years, I've run 2:23 for the marathon, finished top in my age group in the Boston Marathon, and was the World Marathon Age Group Champion in 2023 at Chicago. Let me share how this book has helped me stay competitive as a masters athlete and how you can use it too. Daniel's Running Formula is an evidence-based, comprehensive guide to running based on scientific principles. It's a top resource for both athletes and coaches, novice and elite. It provides a structured and personalized approach to training, empowering runners to achieve their full potential. It is a dense read, but considered a must-have for serious runners and coaches. This video should make some of it easier to digest. I'll be giving you some practical tips and provide a step-by-step guide on creating a personalized plan and insights for masters runners. The Daniel's Running Formula takes the guesswork out of not just the workouts, but also the intensities at which the workout should be run. A lot of times, athletes have a tendency to run their workouts too hard or too easy, not by mistake, but just because they don't know what pace they should be going. I've been running for over 30 years, and I still use the Daniel's Running Formula to adjust my paces, both for races and for workouts. Let's take a step back and look at the science behind the Daniel's Running Formula. It's based around the concept of what Daniel's calls the VDOT, which is a loose interpretation of the VO2 max. VO2 max being the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can take in at any given time. What it does is predict your race performance. By inputting a recent race time or an estimated time, you can get a VDOT score. This score then correlates to predicted race times at other distances. For example, if you're on a 5K at a certain time, your VDOT score can estimate what you might be able to do for a 10K or a marathon. But you need to be careful about taking correlations too far across the table. When I was in college, I ran an 8:05 at 3,000 meters, which was similar to my 5K and 10K expected times. But I could never have run a 2:14 marathon, which is the VDOT equivalent. And I certainly couldn't have run an 800 equivalent to those distances either. Same thing goes in the other direction now. I ran a 2:23 2 years ago, but there's no way I could run a 4:19 mile, which is the equivalent VDOT time. I think it's probably safe to move 2, maybe 3 distances across the VDOT table. It also gets used to determine training paces. Perhaps more importantly, your VDOT score provides you with specific training paces for different types of runs. Your easy runs, your tempo runs, your interval training, your marathon pace workouts. This helps ensure you're training at the right intensity to maximize your improvements. In essence, the VDOT is used to help runners assess their current fitness level, and then also set realistic race goals based on how well the workouts are going. This is an important aspect of marathon racing. Setting an appropriate pace for the first half of the race can be crucial for the latter half of the race, as it's all too often common to see racers go out too hard. I've been using the Daniel's Running Formula for decades. Here's a look at the first edition with Bob Kennedy on the front. And if you scroll to page 128, there's a pretty awesome picture of me when I was in my prime. I think this was probably in 1997 or 1998. All right, let's take a look at how you would calculate your VDOT. This is a lot simpler if you've already run a distance between 1,500 meters in a marathon at 100% intensity. If you haven't, you could do a time trial and get an approximation of what your VDOT would be. And if you think you left a little bit on the table, you could probably go up a notch or two on your VDOT. To be honest, it probably doesn't matter that much if you hit it exactly. To start things off, especially if you haven't run any races lately, you're really just trying to get in the right ballpark. So let's just take a quick look at an example. Let's say you ran a 25-minute 5K, and I'm looking at page 77 at table 5.1. This is the VDOT table that allows you to convert your racing distances into your VDOT. So if I scroll down, and I can't remember what I said, 25 minutes, I think. If you're in 25 minutes for a 5K, that looks like that equates to about a VDOT of 38. And you can see that the Daniels tables are saying that this is approximately equivalent to a 52:17 10K and a 1:55 half marathon. Now, it also says it's equivalent to a 3:59 marathon. That might be a little bit of a stretch to be able to go 4 spots over on the VDOT table. The score itself is useful in being able to estimate what you can do over other distances. But where it really gets useful is being able to equate it to the appropriate training intensities for your various types of workouts. The table to estimate your training intensities is on page 80. Again, this is on edition number 4. It's table 5.2. So I'm going to go down to the VDOT of 38. Remember, that was the VDOT that equated to a 25-minute 5K, which is a time trial or a race that we did recently. And you can see here that the easy or long run training pace should be somewhere between 9:56 and 11:06 per mile, or 6:11 and 6:54 per kilometer. For your marathon paced workouts, you're going to be running approximately 5:45 kilometers or 9:15 miles. For your threshold pace, you're going about 8:22 per mile or 5:12 per kilometer. And you can also see the corresponding paces for various track intervals for both your interval and repetition pace. Now, we'll get to the different meanings for these types of intensities when we get to the training portion of this video. And your VDOT's going to change throughout the season, right? Presumably, as the training effects catch up with you, your VDOT should get a little bit higher as the season goes on, as you get closer to your peak races. So you might start your training at a 38, but then you might be running some workouts that indicating that they're a little bit too easy, or you might do another tune-up race in the middle of your training cycle and decide that maybe you've graduated to a VDOT of 40, and then you don't want to adjust your training paces accordingly. Okay, so now that you have your VDOT and you know what the appropriate paces are for the various intervals, you take that information and you bring it over to the second portion of the book, which has all the training plans. Now, the book is designed for distances from anything from an 800 meter right up to the marathon. And the principles are really the same regardless of what distance you're doing. I'm going to focus on the marathon because that's what I've been doing my prep work for. But really, the concepts are exactly the same if you're training for a 5K, a 10K, 1500, whatever it might be. Chapter 16 is devoted to the marathon. This is where you take your paces from your VDOT and you apply them to the various training programs. In Table 16.1, Daniels discusses the 6 different approaches to marathon training. And these are all slight different takes on one another, with the novice being the exception. It assumes that the runner has not been doing a substantial amount of running. The other 5 programs do assume that the runner coming into the program has been putting in a solid amount of miles. So while you might look at something like the final 18 weeks or the final 12 weeks, it's certainly not something that you could jump in and be doing 0 miles and come in and jump into the 18-week session or the 12-week training plan. It requires quite a bit of miles. I usually gravitate towards the 2Q program, largely because for me, I find that doing 2 interval sessions per week or 2 quality sessions per week is effective for my training. I tend to carve out some time on Wednesday and on Saturday to do those sessions. I'd probably benefit from something like the 4-week cycle, which every 4th week allows you to take a little bit of downtime from the quality session while also keeping the miles up. Once you've picked one of your 6 approaches to the marathon training, the next big decision that you need to make is to determine how many miles you plan on running for that cycle. Now, this is a pretty controversial topic, and we could probably do a whole video on this part alone. I would probably be a little on the cautious side, and assuming in your previous training cycles that you haven't been injured, I probably wouldn't increase anything by more than 10 or 15%. So if you made it through the spring, running up at a max of like 60 miles per week, I probably wouldn't increase things by more than 10%, 15%, maybe an extra 10 miles during that second session. So when you have your approach and you have your peak mileage selected, you have in front of you a pretty customized training program that should act as a good blueprint for where things start. Now, even Daniels would recommend that you would want to make some tweaks to match your strengths and weaknesses, and also to match the course that you're running on. For instance, if you're running Chicago on a flat course, your training might look a little bit different than if you're running a hilly marathon like Boston, where it's going to warrant a little bit more hills, both up and down, to get cycled into the training cycle. But the training program that you have is probably a good place to start, and you can make some tweaks from there. One of the tweaks that I've made as I've gotten older, regardless of the course I'm running on, is to do a little bit of cross training, mostly on the elliptical, to try to give my legs a little bit more of a break while also still getting in the cardio and burning the calories. I've found that I've been less injured by doing that, and typically the extra mileage just, for me, hasn't been worth the extra benefit. So given that I'm not really doing any miles on Sunday, this brings my miles for the week down. And so I usually still end up running in the 86 to 100 mile range. So I'm going to actually switch over to doing this program for my training block going into Boston. So the session I plan on doing is the 86 to 100 mile per week training plan. I mentioned before that I would probably do the 2 quality session program, the 2Q session. My training plan is sort of laid out on page 242. I typically start my training block 16 to 14 weeks before the event. I'm looking to be probably starting at 15 weeks out, which would be next week. We're getting pretty close to starting the sessions for Boston in April. So if you want to take a look at the top of page 242, you can see that 15 weeks out from the race is the first column. This is the weeks until the race. Second column is the fraction of peak. So if I'm going to run 90 miles, which is probably a good goal for me for my peak mileage for this training block, I would just take 90 miles and multiply it by that fraction of the peak. So 0.9 times 90 miles is 81 miles. So the training plan is suggesting that I run 81 miles for this week. And to the right of that, you can see in the workout area that there are 2 workouts. There's Q1 and Q2. Like I mentioned, I typically do these on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So for Q1, the first workout of the week, this is a 2E, so that's 2 miles easy. 8M, that means 8 miles at marathon pace. 1T, that's 1 mile at threshold or tempo pace. 4M, so another 4 miles at marathon. 1T, another mile at threshold pace. 2M, 2 miles at marathon pace, and then 2E. Now, if there is rest between these, it is typically indicated. So this session is a continuous session going from one to the next. Occasionally, and actually typically, to be honest, I will do my warm-up in my trainers and then put on my racing shoes to do the faster marathon and threshold work. But if you're going to follow it by the way it's written in here, you actually wouldn't really do any breaks in between. And that might be something I would change. I'm actually a big believer of making changes in your training program, just to make sure that your body is getting exposed to new stimuli. I've also found that as I've gotten a little bit more accustomed to the workouts, or maybe it's some of the workouts that I do on the treadmill, that I have been very successful with completing the workouts and not quite as successful on the race day. And that's not to say that hasn't been a successful race, but my estimate of what my race performance would be has always been a little bit faster than where it actually ended up for the last few races. And so I'm considering making a few adjustments to make things a little bit more difficult. One of those adjustments I might make would be to roll from the warm-up straight into my workouts without doing any time in between. So no chance to use the bathroom, no extra carbs during that area, and that certainly would make things a little bit more difficult. So if I'm going to estimate my pace for that workout, I could probably, consider using my last race. However, my last race was at the marathon distance, and that was in October at Chicago, where I ran a 2:28. If I'm being honest with myself, I'm not quite as fit as I was. Right at the time, I was had a lot of volume leading into that race, and I cut the mileage pretty drastically after the race to give my body a chance to recover, and I've just been gradually slowly building back up. So while my VDOT, says that it's 67 based on my last performance, if I were to estimate how fast I could go run a marathon right now, I probably would say it's probably around a 2:31 or 2:32. So I'm probably going to do my workouts at a VDOT of 65. So let's take a look at what my training paces should be with a VDOT of 65. All right, so I'm looking over on page 82, coming down to the VDOT of 65, and you can see that my easy pace here is, there's a bit of a range of 6:24 to 7:16 per mile. That seems pretty accurate. I mean, I actually find things go a little bit easier on the treadmill, and so 6:24 would probably be a pretty normal pace for what I would do on the treadmill right now. If I'm running outside with Ellie, my dog, we tend to have quite a few stops, and my pace is somewhere in that 7:16 range. So that seems pretty accurate for what I'm doing now. I'm not afraid to go outside of that range, especially on the slow side. It happens pretty often, especially as I get more fit. If my VDOT gets into the 69 range, it's saying that my pace should be 6:06 to 6:55. And there's definitely some days where I'm running a lot slower than 6:55 on my easy days, even when I legitimately think that my VDOT is somewhere around 70 or 69. So the workout discussed had some easy miles, which I just discussed. I had some marathon pace workout and some threshold work. So it's looking like the threshold work is 549 mile or 337 kilometers, and the threshold work is around 532 per mile. So, going back to the workout that I was looking at before, basically running 2 miles easy, and then eight miles at that at that marathon pace, 549, and then switching gears in the middle of the run, getting it down to 532 pace. Actually, should have been, and then going back up to marathon pace, and so on. You get the idea. You'll notice that unlike some of the shorter training plans, like the 5K or 10K, the marathon training programs don't have a whole lot of interval and repetition work. And so, but there is some examples here. If you look on, week 11 here, on the second, on Q2, the second quality session of the week, you can see there's an 8-mile warm up, and then 6 by 1 kilometer at interval pace, and then there's 4 by 400 at repeat pace. So, to get the estimate on the pace you should be running it, for those, you'd go back and look at the VDOT table again and see what the appropriate pace is. I think one of the crucial concepts to training this way is that all your workouts don't need to be all out, and they don't all need to end in you being totally exhausted. And I think that's a common problem for a lot of athletes, especially ones who are really highly motivated, is that they finish each session totally going to the well, and they're exhausted, and they just don't really leave themselves a whole lot of energy for the following session on the next day or later in the week. And this really only compounds as you get older. I used to be able to easily do 3 workouts, sometimes 4 workouts, typically track workouts in a week. But now even 2 weeks sometimes is a bit of a struggle. On a Saturday where I do one of the workouts like the one described previously, even by Wednesday I can find that my legs are still a little bit drained. I wouldn't say that they're sore, but they just don't have the pep And like I mentioned, sometimes running at that easy pace is a real struggle. But I find that having some specific guidance on the pace is helpful, so that I don't, I find I have less of a tendency to try to run that one really fast interval, or to run that one last mile, all out. Sort of adjusting the mindset that you are trying to leave something in the tank for the next day and for later in the week. Certainly having some specific paces and some evidence-based workouts is really helpful to know that what you're working on has been tried and tested by other athletes. This is the 4th edition of the book. Certainly not a ton has changed, but there has been some tweaks to the workouts. And so presumably as people have learned more about what worked and what hasn't, there has been some minor adjustments to the to the training programs, which I find really, really valuable. So I mentioned that I'm not a big fan of running any specific workout harder than you should, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't make adjustments. If you're finding that your workouts are routinely too easy, it's okay to make some adjustments to your VDOT. If I'm at 65 right now, like I said, is my estimate. I'm hopeful that by Boston in April that my VDOT is more in the 69 to 70 range, and so I'll gradually increase my VDOT, which will lower the pace that I'm trying to run these. But I'm not going to be doing it on the fly. I'm not going to be pounding that last interval to try to make those adjustments. The other thing that the that the VDOT is really useful for, as I mentioned earlier, is to assess what a good goal is for a race. So that whether it's a 5K, 10K, marathon, it's really helpful to know what you expect to run. Especially for something like the marathon. I find that I have a lot of control of how fast I go through the half marathon. I don't find I have a ton of control over how fast I do the second half of the marathon. So if I have a pretty good sense of what my level of fitness is, then at least I can control the part that is controllable. And for me, if I'm trying to run a 2:25 and I think that it makes sense for me to run even splits, then I'm going to go through halfway at 1:12:30, plus or minus 30 seconds. It doesn't need to be spot on. But to me, that's a lot better than just going out and just running by your gut. I know very few runners who, at least in the first half, run on their sort of gut feeling. It is extremely helpful to have a sense of how fast you're going, and coming through in a reasonable split. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that even doing negative splits is the more efficient way to run a race. I haven't typically been all that successful in doing them that way, but I think that's just because I tend to be a little bit over ambitious. If there's any sort of whiff that I can run a PR, then I'm gonna sort of set myself up and go through the halfway at that at that pace or faster, having big dreams. And so you sort of have to tread the fine line from dreaming big and being realistic, because in a marathon, sure, I'd love to run a world record, but if I were to go out there at that kind of pace, my race would be over at the kilometer mark. If I go through a kilometer at marathon world record pace, it's done. I could pack it all in right there. So the flip side to the VDOT is that not only is it really helpful for creating appropriate training paces, it's probably even at least as useful on race day for setting your goals. And I'll find a snapshot or a video of my forearm. I always have my excuse me. I always have my forearm covered with my goal paces for the the 5K, 10K, 15K, and so I'm pretty systematic, and I'm pretty careful about making adjustments to my pacing. So the VDOT system really helps me to be able to do that in a reasonably objective way. I think this is a really useful book, and you should definitely, especially if you've made it this far into the video, I certainly think you would find a ton of value from this book. It I think I touched a lot on the Daniels running formula and the VDOT. But that's actually only part of the book. I think that's the main reason people will probably pick this up. But it's actually also just a really good general running book. The second half of the book is almost totally devoted to the running formula and VDOT and how to apply that to training. But the first half of the book is just as good as any other book I've ever had, and it's fairly concise. It's very evidence based, and it's based in science. Not a lot of opinions, a lot of stuff based on working with literally thousands of athletes. So hopefully you found this video useful. Hopefully you find this book useful. My intention is to go through some other books that I've also found have been helpful for my training over the years or the decades. Things have evolved a little bit, and over the last 30 years, and there's a lot more knowledge out there. It's a lot more accessible, and it's actually some of the stuff that I really get geeked out on isn't just in the running realm. I'm actually really a big fan of applying productivity concepts to running and sort of taking a systems-based approach to my training. So yeah, hopefully you'll check back later or subscribe, and I'll be discussing some of those books in the near future. Thanks for your time.